Okay, so yeah, so welcome everybody tonight. I was going to go through a notebook that I'd put together. Back a few weeks ago, we had a session on diffusion, and there was a couple questions that came up. I didn't really feel like I ever kind of understood what these probability flow lines were, and so I was just diving in, playing with that a little bit. So um, yeah, so I just want to go through the notebook. Feel free to speak up, correct. I don't know that I have this right. And I also have no idea how long it's going to take. It could be very short or very long. Um, so anyhow, so here's the notebook. We're going to look, I actually didn't compare, just realized as I was reading the original objective, I didn't actually compare SDE and ODE reverse time trajectories, but more dived into these uh, the trajectories, the probability flow trajectories. Along the way, I would say that I tried to kind of visualize, confirm some of the concepts that it's built upon. So like re-parameterization trick, kind of try to show that results in the same curve. So anything, what else? Oh, CDF contour. So when I started thinking about um, the uh, the probability flow lines, uh, and we were trying to describe what exactly is that line. One of the things that came up was this concept that the probability density or the probability mass between two contour lines doesn't change. So I played with that and then looked at them and again kind of just visualized that, yeah, actually that does match the probability flow as well. So and then there was another, I didn't see, I think it was Vita was on when we had that session and asked the question about does this trajectory look like, does it equal the mean of the SDE, the stochastic trajectories from a given point? So I kind of tried to create that so that we could answer that question as well.
Okay.
Okay?
Hey, Roger, are you going to back up to kind of what SDE to ODE is for
I could,
people that
yeah,
might?
yeah, I could do a quick one. I threw this slide in because I felt like this one slide captured a lot of what we talked about in one
Okay,
slide. So
thank
the
you.
idea here then is the SDE, or what is it, stochastic differential equation, where you're adding noise to a data signal. So what we're going to do in this paper is we're only going to look at one-dimensional data. So we'll have probability distributions in 1D. Just makes it simpler to look at and understand. So in this diagram, then, this PDF, the probability density function of X, the data, as a function of X is along here. You can see that little cursor, right? Okay. Um,
Yep.
and so in this particular example that I copied over from, I think it was Dave's slide. Dave, was this actually part of this song paper?
Yes, this is
Yeah.
copied over from Yang Song's presentation on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So this is the PDF of the data in the forward direction. Then we're basically adding noise. So G of t is awaiting for the noise. dw is the noise that you're adding to it. And f of xt is what I thought this was mostly about adding noise, but it turns out that f of xt is also an important element of the SDE. So the idea is you start with a data distribution that looks like something, in this case, kind of a bimodal Gaussian mixture, and you gradually add noise to the signal. And the noise that you're adding is a prior of some sort, which is another distribution. In this case, it's a normal distribution. So as you add noise to normal, or you sample from the normal distribution and add that noise to the data sampled from the data distribution, follow the different lines. So this is like, sample it, then add a little noise, add a little noise, add a little more noise. This is a time. It's not really time in a sense of time passing. It doesn't require time passing, but it's just a variable that they use to measure or to control the diffusion from the data distribution to the prior distribution. But you keep adding noise, and they end up some point over here that based on just adding a whole bunch of noise. And in this case, we've sampled a number of points on the data distribution and added those and plotted all the different distributions. They don't show them all, of course, but the idea is that if you add enough noise, something that used to look like data now just looks like noise. And then there's a reverse process that takes something that looks like noise and guides it towards something that looks like data. And the equation for the reverse SDE, which I didn't really dive into a lot here, but the equation for that is provided here, where you're using this score function inside of here. They call it the score function. And what is it? The original weightings, which could be a function of time. In all my examples, I didn't use the F and G as a function of T. They're just constant, but you can use those then. This is a noise that you add at each sample point. So you kind of move in that direction, add a little noise, move in that direction, add a little noise. And this is showing the trajectory of, these lines are showing the trajectory of sampling from the distribution, or the prior rather, following this stochastic differential equation in reverse, and eventually end up with points that look like data. They're within the data distribution. There is a corresponding ODE that matches this same trajectory, not the same trajectory, it matches the same distribution, and that is the part that we're going to look into a little bit on this. Was there anything else? Anything I missed there, Dave or Ted or whoever you'd like to cover in the summary?
Roger, I'll just throw out super high level for anybody who's like brand new. Like this diffusion we're talking about is the diffusion that's behind DALL-E, stable diffusion, all these wonderful image generation models. And so a few weeks ago, we were talking about some aspect of this, and this slide is this simplification instead of like images that are, let's say, 256 by 256, 3 colors, which is impossible to visualize 700 dimensions. It was like, hey, just imagine a 1D problem. And even then we were struggling. And I remember I actually was chatting with Dave after the meetup ended, and he managed to at least answer one of my questions after the meetup was over.
Okay. Yeah, so there's the differential equations that match this, and those are handy because in order to determine a distribution over here using the stochastic equations, you have to do a lot of sampling and then try to determine the distribution of the data afterwards. If you can do it with an ODE, there's a direct trajectory from the prior to the data distribution. And I will look at kind of what that looks like, and trying to understand what these little white lines are was why I started on this little notebook. And Dave, is it proper to call those the probability flow? That's what I started using, but I want to ask that question. Whoops, did we lose him? He was in the car, so we might have lost him.
Yeah, I seem to recall that's what Yang Song called the white.
I lost the signal, and I guess.
Yeah, Dave, I just was asking the question. So these white lines that are the white lines that come from, what is it? The using the score function to go from prior to data. I called those probability flow, and I just want to double check that I was using right. Ted says he thinks that is the correct term, so.
That's correct, and that corresponds to the ODE flow. Yeah, probability flow ODE. Yeah.
Okay.
It says also there in the legend, if you notice there, on the top, SDE and probability flow SDE. Now, right above the first white line.
Oh, probability flow. Thank you. Perfect. that confirms it. Okay. Okay, so throughout the notebook, I have a bunch of cells that are coding cells that are hidden. I tried to make visible the ones that kind of had some sort of the math in it, but ones that are primarily associated with plotting, I hid. So, okay, so in order to simplify this, I'm going to just study Gaussian mixture models for the data. And likewise for the prior, just going to study simple Gaussian distributions. I'm not sure why you choose actually other priors. If anybody knows, I'd be interested to hear. But for this example, I just use Gaussian. So there were other implementations of Gaussian mixture models I found later, but I started with this one. Basically, provide a set of weights, means, and the sigmas, standard deviations. The API that I provide, if you just call it, you're getting essentially sampling from the PDF. So it takes the sum of the sampled, a weighted sample of the PDF for each of the weights, means. Let's see, where's that? Yeah, okay. I take the normal PDF and sample it at X for given mean and sigma, and then sum all those up for all the elements in the mixture, the GMM. RVs is just another API basically to the same call. If I want to sample it, then you basically choose which of the Gaussians you want to select from, a weighted choice on there, and then you sample that Gaussian. And so that's what that implements. I forget why I did the derivative log p here, but that's not a good sign. You can reopen and close. The window is not responding. That's not a good sign. You guys still there?
Yeah.
We're
Yep,
still
we
waiting
still
because
see,
you
hear
pushed
you.
keep waiting.
Okay. Let me see if it comes back.
Can you see us or did your Zoom freeze as well?
No, I can see you and I can hear you. I'm just trying to open my windows again. Sorry.
I've definitely had the fun experience where like I can still hear people, but my Zoom is gone. And so there's some process out there that's like taken over and can still project information and people can still see me, but Zoom isn't allowed anymore.
All the
That's
technical issues.
Sally, that's telling you need to buy more memory.
That's probably true. I should definitely buy more computers.
Yes.
Okay.
One can never
you
have
back in?
too much horsepower. Yeah, you're looking good, Roger.
Okay. Okay, so scrolling down through that, Gaussian, this is the one I started by implementing the class Gaussian and using that, but then I just switched over to, I think it was one of the standard Gaussian distributions. So I included it for completeness sake, but it's not really used, and I haven't converted it over. And this comes in later. There's a place where I want to use estimate densities, and I'm using one of the, I think it was scikit or scilern or something like that, Gaussian mixture, yeah, scilern, Gaussian mixture models, which has a fit. So you can declare a Gaussian mixture, and then you can fit it to the data. And histogram estimate, where I just break things into bins and just kind of look at what does the bin look like, more of a bar chart type of thing. Okay, so we start with, we're just going to look at some trajectories. Again, a normal distribution for the prior, in this case, a mixture model that's evenly balanced. So this would be an example of a data distribution, the PDF. This is a example of a prior distribution, again, just a unit norm. And I wanted to start by using this, just doing the stochastic kind of forward pass on that first slide that we saw. I want to draw those individual lines, the squiggly lines that we saw. So I played with this initially. Like I said, I kind of naively thought it was just add noise. If you just add noise to the data, eventually the data turns into noise. And it turns out that that's not entirely true. And this was pointed out actually in the Song paper in 2021. He called it variance exploding and variance preserving. So if you just add noise, so this would mean you're not doing anything with existing data, you're just adding noise, then you will, so this is the code implementing this equation basically. It's an iterator, just returns values that add some W1 times the X, W2 times the sampled noise distribution. So this is the example. Then variance exploding is what, again, I thought we were doing when we were noising these things in the forward pass. But what you can see is that these all start from the point 0, and you can see that this just grows and grows and grows. Look at the scale on the left. If we kept on going, it would just grow kind of infinitely wide. If, on the other hand, we use these parameters for variance preserving, where the weight on the first is minus beta. Beta is kind of controls how quickly it's diffusing. And W2 is square root of beta. If we use those particular parameters, then what happens is, again, it looks somewhat similar, but if you look at the scale, you see that it grows to normal distribution, and it just continues on at a normal distribution. So if you run that one forever, you will get the normal distribution that you want. This one, if you run it forever, you get an ever increasing variance on it. Is there any questions on that? Okay.
So this is just the added noise before you add it to X, the original bimodal distribution?
So this is that original equation. Let's see if this thing is going to respond okay to scroll up. This is the original equation here, where we started with some data and we just keep adding noises, and it becomes a all noisy signal. In my case that I just showed you, instead of X distribution like that, I have a point density at 0.
Okay.
And we're just watching that expand.
Got it. Thank you.
Makes sense? Okay. The one I did here was just a sample. We'll look at several different data distributions and see how it behaves for that.
By the way, Roger, if you didn't do the variance preserving one, you still do get a Gaussian one. It's just, if you did this forever, your numbers just get bigger and bigger. But if you scaled it down, it would still be Gaussian.
Yeah, it's a Gaussian, but it'll be an infinitely large variance.
It's called a Wiener process, I think. Linear increasing, integrated white noise gives a Wiener process with linearly growing variance.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
So better to scale it and keep it from growing.
Yeah, I mean, because otherwise you don't. Again, it becomes a function. It's a linear function, as was it whoever mentioned that. And how do you sample from it? It becomes more difficult to sample. This allows us to, no matter what, if we go long enough, we'll get into what's basic, more or less, not entirely, but more or less a Gaussian distribution. What's interesting is, this is the other thing is, I thought at the end of this cycle it was pure noise. But actually, no, there is always some part of the signal that's left. It won't have completely disappeared. You get it down to where it's small enough, but you can still see a little bit of the data in there. The mean of the data will be the last thing to disappear. Well, it'll never disappear, but that'll be what's remaining. Okay, so, but looking at this, it's a little hard to kind of tell what's going on. So I wanted to look at PDFs for these data and watch how the PDF changes over time. So I looked at a couple different ways to determine PDF. So we know the ground truth because I'm starting with a GMM. If we get enough data points, we can just do a histogram. You make a lot of data, it smooths it out. A lot of data makes it less noisy, and more bins makes it smoother. But you got to calculate a lot of data, but it doesn't assume Gaussian. This Gaussian mixture fit that showed up a little earlier basically is trying to do a parameter fit on the data, assuming an nth order Gaussian mixture. And then there was another one I used, which was a Gaussian KDE. I didn't really dive into that too much because I found out that it didn't work very well. But I compared those two here. So this is looking at, so this is an asymmetric Gaussian distribution, multimodal. Two different Gaussians, one with low variance, one with higher variance. The gray, the background is, you can kind of see is the ground truth PDF. And the history estimate, you can't see real good here, but you can see the green kind of going in through here. That would be the histogram estimate of the PDF. In this case, I used a second order Gaussian mixture model to fit. That's the red. That seems to fit almost perfect. And then this kernel method, you can see it's off. It doesn't capture it very well. It misses this low variance spike and underestimates the main one. So looking at that, the Gaussian estimate, the Gaussian mixture model estimate seemed to be the best, but what I went back and realized is that it depends on if I got the order correct. So if I have in here, I've got my data has, it's a second order Gaussian mixture, and if I use, so this is a Gaussian mixture model with an estimate with a first order, second order, and third order model. The first order misses it all together. The second order matches up, that'd be what, the black? The black follows really good. And if I give it too many, then it starts to fall off. So the blue falls off down here, doesn't it? And maybe overshoots a little up here. So I can't just, I thought at first I could just make it a higher order and it would always fit, but it seems like it doesn't fit as well as you thought. So on the other hand, the histogram, if I bump up enough data, enough bins, you can see that follows, I did three different types. I think it was a first order, second order, and third order Gaussian mixture model that I was trying to fit, and the histogram catches it every time. So in some ways the histogram is a better tool, but it just makes it a little bit more awkward, noisy to look at. So through the rest of it, I use a Gaussian mixture model with a parameter fit.
Hey, Roger?
Yeah.
What is going on right at the top of your screen with the histogram model there? Why is it
Here? Are you talking
no,
right here?
No, right next to the 5 and things like that? What is it capturing it, or it's going to 0 or whatever, right?
You're talking about the red, is that right?
Yes.
The red trace.
Yeah.
So yeah, this maybe I should have done it differently. So there's 3 different ground truths. There's one down here, one up here. So this one, and this one are 3 different ground truths. And one of them, I think, what's the first one? Red. That's a single. So this is a single, this notation is one Gaussian with a mean of -4 and a standard deviation of 1. So when in the red one, we're fitting to a single Gaussian. So it
okay.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little confusing there. And then the last one is a third order Gaussian mixture, and that's the one that has we lay on top of it the blue, and the blue tracks.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so I should have done it differently to show that it's tracking different order ones.
Yeah.
But in all cases,
that's okay. Yeah, but it's working correctly though. That's
yeah.
Thanks.
So again, my conclusion was, okay, I'm going to go ahead and use the Gaussian because I know, and I should know the order, but it'd be good to check it probably with the histogram because that actually worked pretty well. You had to get a lot of points to get it very smooth. I think I might have had like 10,000 points or something like that.
100,000, isn't it?
Yeah, 100,000 points to get that right. So, to get it that smooth.
Okay.
Or to get it
Thank you.
Noisy. Yep. Okay. So now that we have that tool available to us, I went back and looked at some of these other distributions. So this is just looking at the variance exploding and variance preserving in a using a PDF estimate. So for time 0 to 100 up to 999, I'm just running a estimate of the PDF probability density function at each point in time. That makes sense? What I'm plotting here.
So what are you estimating now?
So now this is the same as this one up here, these two. It's the same as this, but instead of time going across here and we just do stochastic traces, instead what I'm doing is I'm running a larger number than I could plot this way, a larger number of trajectories, and then I'm running an estimate at each time, like 200, running an estimate of what's the distribution look like at that point of the trajectories that are going through there. So they're stochastic trajectories, the distribution estimated at different times of a large number of stochastic trajectories.
And so what's your starting distribution and what is your ending time, big T?
So in this, we go up to 1,000.
Okay.
And the starting distribution is a point probability mass at 0.
Thank you.
Hey, Roger. So if you go back to that.
Which one?
Any one of those variants excluding.
You're talking about the stochastic traces, these?
Yeah, this one. So essentially what we have there is it okay if I just do an annotation and then remove that later?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. So essentially what I'm assuming what you have is instead of whatever number of trajectories there are, let's say these are 20 trajectories, but you now have, let's say 100,000 trajectories, right?
Right.
And then what you're plotting there is you're looking at this time slice and then plotting how the distribution of these points are at different time slices.
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Okay. Let me erase this, sorry.
Okay.
There you go, thank you.
And each slice is represented by a different plot here. Okay. All right, so from here on, I'm going to just use the variance preserving weights, and I'm just going to use a unit prior, norm prior. So I come up with an iterator here that basically does that. You set the beta, start the data distribution prior, the beta that you're using for this diffusion, and it'll just iterate. It'll provide values, tuples of samples and time t. So the beta, this guy basically controls, let's see, how is beta used here? You take the beta and multiply it times the random, that's the, I believe that's, yeah, square root of the beta times your noise is what you're adding. And then beta over 2 minus beta over 2 times x is the other part of the variance preserving parameters. So beta is a value that controls how quickly we converge. So if you look at beta equals 0.1, in this example, I'm starting with a trajectory with a bias of 10 and a variance of 5. And if you have beta 1, it comes down very quickly, before 100, t equals 100, and then runs this unit norm distribution for the rest of the time. If beta is 0.01, you can see that it's doing the same thing, it's just coming down more slowly. And 0.001, it takes even longer. I don't know if you can see those traces, they're a little faint, but it hasn't converged, it's come down halfway or something like that. I also look at it now using these PDFs estimates. So at the various times, you can see that this is a fairly broad variance centered around 10. And you can see it's, boy, by the first sample, 2 time equals 200. Oh, shoot. Okay, time equals 200. It's already down to unit variance. If it's beta's 0.01, you can see is almost down there, and then it certainly has reached it by probably the third, t equals 800, you're down to a unit norm distribution. And if beta is 001, it comes down more slowly. We can see that it gets down to this, it never actually reaches all the way down. I am having problems again here with this responding. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. I'm going to look at it again with some different initial conditions. Just wanted to see. So this is low variance, gets expanded to larger. So it starts at very low variance. I start with, I forget, 0.1 or something like that. And then, gosh darn it. You guys are still hearing me, okay, right? Yeah, we're having problems.
Yes.
This notebook's hanging up again. Here we have high variance coming and it gets squeezed down. And then the next one we can see that we have a large bias that gets exponentially decays down into a zero bias. Okay. This is frustrating that whatever is going on. Could be.
Whatever problem you're having, Roger, it's not affecting us. Like, we see your screen, it looks great.
Okay, it's just that it stopped scrolling and, okay. This is another view of the same thing, again, from a PDF perspective. Low variance gets spread out, high variance gets condensed down, and then a bias term, you can see that it drifts down to zero pretty quickly. Okay. Also wanted to do a couple bimodals. So here's the 50-50 minus 4 and 4. And then I have an asymmetric one where you have a larger weight on one and also different variances on the two. You can see in the bimodal, you can see the two SDE trajectories kind of come together. Asymmetric, same way. There's the PDF view of the same thing. So the bottom one you can see has the low variance, high variance, and then they kind of combine together. Okay, so that was just kind of background, just looking at what these trajectories look like from a stochastic perspective. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so then there's this other thing that I wanted to look at a little bit, which is the re-parameterization trick, where they, instead of adding noise n times, if it's Gaussian noise, I think it doesn't require Gaussian prior data, just Gaussian prior. Instead of adding it n times, there's a way to come up to formulate the equation to jump directly to time t, and that's expressed by this equation up top with the alpha. And so I just implemented that. This SDE2 BP is an implementation of that. You can see square root, so square root of alpha x0 and 1 minus alpha times the noise. So that's what we got going on down here. And then the alpha is the product, is beta. Where is that? That doesn't, alpha equals sum of BI. Oh, it's BI to the nth. Yeah, okay. So that alpha calculation implements that top product. Whatever that symbol is, that means the product of BI is from 1 to t.
Isn't it pi? Am I right? No.
Pardon me? Is that a capital pi?
Isn't it a capital pi?
Okay.
I think
I don't want to be wrong. I'm not the smartest.
Okay, and so here I just, again, visually just kind of confirming that this parameterization works. I do it once with the SDE VP was the iterator that would actually roll out the points, and then SDE2 VP that does this jump specifically. It just adds the prior and the data and the scaling of the prior. And you can see those two lines, those two distributions then here look similar throughout time.
So you can prove it to be the same. So there's a derivation that you can use to.
Yeah. Like I said, I wasn't proving things. I was just wanting to see it to kind of intuitive it. So, okay. And then I did also the same thing with a bimodal and then estimated it afterwards. So it's kind of the same thing. Okay, so now that we have that, we can create a diffusion that'll work with a Gaussian mixture model, go to any point in time. So given a data distribution and time t and the beta, then we can jump to what is the Gaussian distribution. There'll be another GMM at that time t, and this equation implements that. And I use this weighted sum of two Gaussians equations up there, assuming, I think this was okay to do, just assume the covariance between the two random variables, the two distributions, is 0, and you come up with this equation down here in the code. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Pretty much just code up what the equations are. Okay, so now we can jump into score function, and hopefully I got the math right here. So the score function is defined as the gradient of the log of the probability of x. And if we were just doing a simple Gaussian, it's a nice little linear equation there. That first one, x minus mu over sigma squared. But since we have a Gaussian mixture model, I went through and derived that, and hopefully that math is all correct. What it ends up being is the sum of all the data probabilities times the x minus that mu over that sigma squared, and then divide that whole thing by the probability of the data. Okay. Hopefully nobody wants to go through that here. Okay, so given that, I implemented that and added that to the GMM class. And I plotted a few to see what these look like. So in the case of, let's see, the blue one, the first one, this is a plot of the score function versus x. And this would be, I think these were with respect to distribution with respect to 0. Yeah, 0 mean here until we get into the later ones. So the blue one is just a single norm. It's just got a slope. The second one, the orange one, is a slope with a higher variance. So it's a flatter slope, linear relationship. And then you can see the effect of adding more than one Gaussian into the Gaussian mixture. It gets a point where it shifts them. I didn't do a shift on just a single Gaussian. I should have done a single Gaussian with a shift, but I believe it just moves that line up or down. And then if you have two of them, it's got this crossover thing where it's dominated by one on the left side and dominated by the other on the right side. Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay. So
which is just to clarify, this is essentially what you're hoping for because the crossover point is the point of discrimination probabilistically. Is that right?
No, it's not. We'll see it just in a minute here. So I also plot the score function as a vector field, and so you'll see a little bit of that. But that's basically if I have a kind of think of it as this: if I have a multimodal and I'm in the middle, then I got to go one way or the other. Yep. And right dead center is the one where it's 0. I don't know where to go, but one way or the other, it's like the most probable P of data is one side or the other. Okay.
I missed the axes on that figure, Roger. What's the x and the y on this?
So the x is going to be the actual data x, I believe, and then the y is the value of the score function. which is the gradient of the log of the P of X.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Why does the score function get small? Oh, because at the extremes, you're so far away from either of the distributions, it's not as clear which one you're in. Is that?
Why does it get small? Where do
Yeah,
you
so
mean?
it would get small at the edges.
It's not small. It's either it's highly plus or highly negative.
In the bimodals, it looks like they're highly plus, highly negative, and then they return to zero, right?
No, I'm not quite sure which.
Like the red line.
Yeah, so but those lines will go on to infinity.
Yeah, I
Sully.
only
So if you made the
plotted.
plot a little wider, you would see they just keep going and going until they get very positive or very negative. They're straight lines. Well, they're not actually exactly, but they look really close to straight lines.
Are they actually not linear? I thought they were exactly linear. I mean, for a unimodal.
For unimodal, yeah, but
Unimodal, yeah.
Oh, okay.
bimodal, I don't know if the other term is linear or not, but it's dominated by a linear term. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
For the blue one, is the sigma higher or lower than the orange?
The blue one is the first one. It has a standard deviation of 1. What color is it? Orange is the standard deviation of 2. So it's
So
flatter. It's flatter when you have higher variance. It's steeper when you have lower variance.
yeah, I guess the sigma is in the denominator, so that's why that happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And remember,
so the purple.
this is
Sorry,
the
go ahead.
gradient. It's not the gradient of the PDF, it's the log of the PDF. So it's slightly
Right.
scaled, but it's still going to be the case that the log of your function will always be flatter if your function's flatter, and the log will always be steeper if your function's steeper.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And the purple one, I guess you probably chose a sigma that was smaller, which is why it has a larger sort of amplitude.
It's steeper. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The orange one is a standard deviation of 2. The purple one on one side is 1. On the other side, it's 1/2. You can see can you see at the top of the page there? You can see the parameters.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a weight, then a list of means, then a list of variances. Or
Okay.
standard deviations.
Thanks.
So, okay, let's see. Any more questions on that? I'll try scrolling. Okay, so here then I went to a vector field. So the first vector field is unimodal. So and a variance of, it's a norm of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. And remember, the noise is also mean of 0, standard deviation of 1. So what happens is, you can see what this is, it's just flat. It goes the same way. You can't tell when you add noise because the data was in the same distribution as the noise, the prior. So it's just flat all the way across. If we can scroll down a little, this is one where we had a mean of 5, standard deviation of 2. So you can see, so these vector fields, the way this works, maybe I should describe that first. The score function is in the dimension of the data. And so these vectors are pointing vertical, either up or down vertically. And the magnitude varies, it increases, the magnitude of the field increases the further you get away from the data, the P of data. And then going across, we're watching how the score function changes with time. So horizontally, we got time from 0 to t1000. For each one of those, you're going to have a different distribution. For each one of those, then you'll have the vector fields in the direction of the data. So here you can see where the arrows kind of point to where the what would I say, kind of the mean of the data is, and they will point, the further away you are from the data, the larger the size of the field at that point. So the bigger the value, the bigger the arrow length. Arrow length represents value, magnitude of the field at that point. Arrow direction is the direction of the field. that make sense? So here you can kind of look at that and say, okay, I see where the mean started at 5 because I've got a bunch of very short arrows up there. So I'm pretty close to where the data is, data distribution. And as I move along in time, I can see where the data distribution is shifting to where eventually it's moving down to, should move down to 0. It's not quite there. I'd have to go a little bit further, but down to 0 with a narrow mean, whereas it started at narrow standard deviation, whereas it started out with a much higher standard deviation. Go ahead, Dave.
So this is for the one dimensional, I mean, unimodal or bimodal, but the data is still in one dimension. So you can imagine how complicated the vector fields can become as you go higher dimensions. So, and the curse of dimensionality comes in where all you have is these higher magnitude vector fields almost everywhere, arrows.
Yeah, yeah. And this also assumes that there's no interaction. I mean, I only have one dimension, so you can't have interactions between dimensions. But I imagine that in the general case, there's interaction between dimensions as well.
Yeah, you had that equation where you had the covariance, remember? Sigma 1 square, sigma 2 square up there. I thought that was, I don't think, I was a little distracted then, but I thought, yes, you can have covariance equation impacting essentially. But with the number of dimensions that we're talking about, it's just a very tricky situation to get the right.
Yep.
Yeah. And the reason I bring that up is because there's a lot of effort that has gone in to help stabilize the direction in which to go, because you don't have data for those points, and that's when the noise injection helped with helping you converge in the right direction. But I'll not repeat all that change, but that's an important aspect of or important point to understand why noise injection helps with getting to the right point eventually.
Right. Okay. So this one is an asymmetric bimodal distribution. It's both in terms of weight, I believe, as well as the variance of the two. And you can see the field gets kind of confusing up here in the beginning. You can also see because I think it's because the variance is lower on the top mean, the arrows get really big really quick. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I hope I got the implementation right. I'm not sure if I can directly intuit what goes on in the middle there when those two are interacting early on. But it's kind of noisy there. And we'll see some of that a little bit later if we get to scroll down to that. Okay, so now that we've got a score function, now we can go ahead and implement our reverse time ODE. And so the equation at the top there, I took from Song's slide, is the reverse time. The F and the G, those will be, that's the mixture between the X, the current sample, and the noise that you're adding. And so if you look at the equation that we're using, it's basically the B over 2. Beta over 2 is going to be the F, and the G is going to be the square root of beta. So if I plug those back into this reverse time ODE equation, I come up with the bottom score. And you can see then that the gradient is equal, so dx is equal to the beta scaled by beta, the x, the value x, plus the score function at that time, times dt. And this actually kind of provided an insight to me that it's, if you look at it, if you look at those score function fields, vector fields, they're going to be pushing, that's the score part, they're kind of pushing you towards the data, the center of mass for the data distribution. And then this minus x is going to be pushing you, or minus beta times x is kind of a growth when you're going in reverse time. It's a decay when you're going forward in time, but it's a growth when you go in reverse in time. So it's kind of trying to grow the data, and then the score function is kind of pushing you back towards where the main density of the data is. And that's the balance that guides the trajectory. But anyhow, given that, just implement, you can see down there in the middle where we do samples plus equals, that implements that equation, beta over 2 times the samples plus the score function of the samples times in negative time. So this is a probability flow in reverse time that I'm doing here. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, this function then just will run that reverse equation for some number of points. It samples from the original, in this case, samples from the norm, and then creates a whole bunch of points, migrates those points using that ODE here, and then returns those points. So,
Hey,
okay,
Roger,
so now, yeah.
I just want to say, like, this is so freaking cool. You're a wizard. I'm very impressed that you figured all this out. And like, since yesterday.
No, I worked on it before, so it's I put a little time into it, but thank you.
But thank you for sharing this with us. This is really impressive.
Cool. Okay, so here is our plot. The first one then I plot is unit norm data distribution. And you can notice I'm going backwards in time, right? So it starts at 1,000, goes back to t equals 0. And what I'm doing is I'm sampling x in the prior on the left, and then I'm running the reverse time ODE to the data distribution on the right. So in the first case, since I had a unit norm prior and a unit norm data distribution, those lines actually just go horizontal, right? It's simple. You're not changing the distribution. Down on the next one, on the bias norm, I sample these points around 0, and I run the reverse ODE, and you can see that what happens is it migrates up to a mean of 10. The variance shouldn't have changed very much. It looks like hopefully that's the same. I think that was a variance of 1, but that's the reverse ODE running on a bias data set. The second one, I start with a norm of a prior of 1 variance or 1 standard deviation, and it goes out to a 10 for the data. So you can see that again we're flowing in reverse time. So we're starting on the left in the prior, sample that, project it back through time to t equals 0, and we end up with this wide distribution on the data at time t equals 0. Does that make sense? You still here?
I'm trying
Yeah,
to figure
that's
out
cool.
the different lines.
What
they
do
understand.
what do the lines represent?
Yeah,
Okay, the lines are simply the point on the left axis at t equals 1,000 is just 10 points that I chose in the distribution. So I didn't sample them, I just chose 10 points.
I see. Okay. Yeah, you kind of fixed it equidistant, and then kind of nicely it comes out. Yeah, cool.
Right, yeah, and then just ran the reverse ODE into time t equals 0, and then where do those points map to? Okay.
Yeah, very, very nice.
Okay,
And one quick comment. So the ODE is completely deterministic. So if you start at a certain point on your left at t equals 1,000, you always wind up at exactly the same point at t equals 0. Okay. And because it's completely deterministic, these lines cannot ever cross, because if they crossed, that would mean you have 2 possible destinations from a given starting point. So you'll notice they don't cross, and that's not like, oh, isn't that cute? Like, no, it has to be the case that no matter what points Roger chooses, they can never cross.
right. This asymmetric bimodal gives you kind of see that little kink in there? I think that's because of that noisy part in the score function. I hope that isn't like a coding error. I think it's It's just when you get the interaction between the mixture of these, this very low variance data with high variance data, and as it's all moving towards a combined variance and centered variance, or mean of 0 with a standard standard deviation of 1. It's that interaction between those two, I think, that's causing it, and that shows up in some other places. Okay, I just took that great segue. Oh, was there a question?
I was just gonna say that the kink that you see is that because it's, there's some floating point representation issue or something, that it's kind of like started to go up and it's like, no, you're not going up, you're coming back to 0.
It's possible. I tried to eliminate it by increasing, like there's a place where I'm estimating, wait, would that have affected this one? It's possible.
Because if it is above 0, it goes up, and if it's below 0, it comes down. It's not, they're all not going in the same direction. And so that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, I'd like to tease out, is that a numerical stability problem? I don't think so. I do suspect numerical stability a little later on here, but I think that's not. I think that's real. I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't see it when I had like the variance the same, but but when you had this other, you see it for some reason. You can see there's a low variance on the top collection on time t=0 and a larger variance on the bottom.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
By the way, Roger, Dave has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, no worries, Roger. So one thing that you can see, I'm assuming here, if you vary beta and make it really small, then you will see more smooth out of this reverse flow, and that kink may more or less not appear, and it may appear like more smoother lines, because what this kink is most likely is, yes, there is, of course, this floating point thing, but more importantly, because of this variance being added at certain rate, beta, by the time it reaches whatever that timestamp is, that is, and whatever value is calculated for that timestamp, depending on the probability flow, the vector field for that timestamp, it will go in a specific direction. So Roger, one experiment, if you have not done that I may suggest is to vary beta and see how that affects the kink.
And what would we expect?
Higher, lower the beta, more smooth out of the kink and kind of going more towards the left.
If you use a smaller beta, it'll take longer, but your shape will be more precise. Just so you know, I do not think that this is a problem at all. I think that this is actually great that you chose a couple different examples so we could see different shapes. There is no reason at all in my mind why, just because the score function is positive, it's pointing up at t equals approximately 100, why the score function has to be positive at t equals 50. It could be pointing up at 100 and it could be pointing down at 50. That is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
Right? You saw the pictures of just the score functions. The score function can cross the x-axis, though the x-axis. It can go from positive to negative.
Right.
And move around. And so precisely, I mean, these are some very simple one-dimensional distributions that you're showing us on.
Yeah.
If it can have a kink in a one-dimensional bimodal thing, imagine what it is in a 700-dimensional image with, all sorts of other stuff.
Right. Yeah, I think you can get some intuitive understanding when you're looking at 1D. I certainly did from the first time that we saw it. But I don't know how much it tells you about the higher dimension, because it's going to be hard.
But my point is just that if that kind of a kink is possible with such a simple example, it goes to show how complicated the kinks might be in thousands of dimensions, and why you need some really good theoretical foundations, why you can't just say, oh, let's just create a neural network with 2 layers and it can probably estimate it.
Yeah.
So there is some good work done by NVIDIA, Keras and all. The paper is typically shortened as an acronym EDN. I think it's eliciting, or basically they went about, or elucidating, basically went about doing all kinds of experiments for different kinds of data and different kinds of variance, and for variance exploding and variance preserving and many more, and then came up with the best empirical values, so that the issues that you are seeing, you can see a lot more for the kinds of scale that Ted is talking about, and how to stabilize that, right, for the actual diffusion models, probability flow, convergence, if you may. So this is great, Roger, and this is the foundational work. And at some point in time, maybe as a follow-up of this, if we look at the EDM paper, then we can see that how many experiments they did to figure out where exactly and how exactly they should be. And for the longest time, for 2 to 3 years, despite all the new papers coming out for diffusion models and improvements, EDM always stayed as the state of the art to compare against.
I posted the link to this notebook in the Slack channel. If somebody's got a system that they could load that notebook on, I'm having troubles with my system, and so just as a fallback, if we get stuck, if anybody could volunteer for that. Steiner?
Hi everyone. I'm new to the class.
Hi.
And I just wanted to know if you could please put the Slack channel URL in the link too, in the message too.
Yeah, are you already on our Slack then?
No.
Oh, okay, yeah. Somebody will post a link that'll allow you to join, and you should find a link to this notebook in that in the agenda channel.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So I had this thought to look at this, because when Dave was trying to describe what are these white lines I'm looking at, I thought of them in terms of expanded kind of on the comment that Ted made, which is these lines can't cross. None of these lines can cross. So what it means is that there's the probability mass between 2 lines has to remain constant as you go through time t. And so I kind of set out to try to look at that and see if that matches up. So what I did here is I'm calling these contour lines, which basically I'm arriving, if I'm able to scroll, I lost my cursor here, so I can't scroll just yet. But basically what I do is convert the PDFs to CDFs. And then once I have a CDF, I can solve for a point in the probability. So some point, the CDF will go from 0 to 1. I'll pick some point on that, let's say 0.1 or 0.4 or whatever. And then as the PDF changes over time, so will the CDF change over time. And I'll try to solve for where is the coordinate x that is at the probability, whatever point I'm setting there at that threshold. Okay, I can't see. All right, I'm hosed. Was anybody able to open that notebook?
I'm working on it, Roger.
Okay. I don't know what this guy's doing. Sorry about this, guys.
If it makes you feel any better, are you using, is that Visual Studio?
Yeah.
The Visual Studio has an embedded Edge browser, and Microsoft accidentally deployed a huge bug in Edge last week.
Oh, really?
So this very likely is not your fault.
Okay.
And so if we were to go back 30 years, we could do the blame Bill Gates game. but that's not as popular as it used to be.
Okay.
All right, Roger,
All
I've
right.
got it up.
Okay. If I get stuck, I'll just hand over to you. Okay.
Okay.
Maybe I might need to transfer host, or Dave, can you, Sally, can you grab host too? I grabbed it at the beginning, but maybe we need another host person as well. Okay, so implement CDF. This contour points basically for the target, probability targets. We'll go through and given a GMM, which is the distribution, it's a PDF. It'll use the whatever it was, psi dot optimize.root to find what X is at that probability, and then GMM contour lines will come back and concatenate all those for time t equals 0 to 1000. And I plot it like this. So here, the blue line is the PDF at some time t. The yellow line is the CDF of that PDF. What is it? Cumulative density function, probability density function, and cumulative density. It's basically the integral of the probability density function. Then I will search for a time at 0.5. So that's probability 0.5. Every probability means there's a probability of a random variable being below that of half the time. And then I'll search for, okay, so what X gives me a CDF of 0.5? And that X is what I'm tracking. So I come down here again with a bimodal distribution, and they plot these lines. So over time from 0 to 1000, your PDF is changing as the distribution is adding in more and more noise and subtracting more and more of the original data. And we're looking for the points that are at a particular point on the CDF, and we're plotting those. And those look kind of similar in reverse, but similar to the flows that we saw before. So I wanted to compare them. So this is plotting. I had to flip the time around, I think, to make this work. Yeah, I flipped the flow stuff around so it could go from 0 to 1000 also. And I'm comparing these contour lines that I generated to the flow, the probability flow lines as well. And I'm getting a pretty good match. Doesn't prove anything, but it looks like a pretty good match. So the green is the contour lines for given values. The black is the probability flow. And it looks like they do the same thing. I haven't proven it. And there probably is a proof if this is true. But to me, it looked like thinking of it as lines of constant probability is valid. There was a quirk here. This little kink is different whether I'm computing it using the CDF or the probability flow. And I dived into that a little bit more, and it seems to be, if you look at the times, this is around a very specific probability. It looks like there's variances. So they look pretty much aligned here. They look pretty much aligned at the top end, but in between they vary a little. This is where I was suspecting some sort of numerical stability problem, but I didn't get a chance to kind of tease it out further. Does anybody else have any thoughts or suggestions or anything there? Dave, is your hand up again?
Yes, Roger. So this makes really good sense now, because earlier one of my thought was that, you know, the contour lines correspond to the actual probability density flow, if you may, you know, that represent the density flow for that point at the original prior or whatever, you know, data source it is. But if you actually instead use CDF, then it's always going to be one-to-one, and you know exactly where it should go and map to your prior or vice versa. With the PDF, the question becomes, if is this, I mean, of course it's not for continuous, it's very, you know, you cannot pinpoint what point to take it, but for continuous you can have the CDF, and that makes it unique and one-to-one. But with PDF, if a specific point has a certain density, and
Yeah.
then you could have multiple points on the source with the same density. Then how do you decide
Right.
where you should go on the target? And that
Right.
always, I didn't have the answer to that, and CDF solves that answer. So yeah, thank you, Ajay. That's really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and I agree. So the thing I said about lines not crossing, so if you picked an initial point that was at the 80th percentile, it always has to be the case that 80% of the lines are below you because they can't cross you. And it always
Right.
has to be the case that
Yeah.
20% of the lines are above you because they can't
Right.
cross you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's, I'm not sure I completely get the link back to the score function, but they seem to be saying the same thing. So I did plot the vector score vector field for this particular combination of parameters that is yielding this strange results up here. And I do see a lot of confusion in the score function. So assuming that the score function is right, then yeah, that it kind of makes sense to me that things are not just simple exponential decays like we saw in some of the other more simple ones. Okay, so here then, what I did is looking at that, I said, okay, it gives us a different way to think about it. That the point between two lines, or the probability mass between 2 points that are on 2 contours, either contour lines or the probability flow lines, that has to remain constant. And so I looked at it this way. So here what I'm plotting is the blue shaded part. That's going to be the area under the curve between the 2 points. And that mass, I should have probably recomputed the mass to confirm it, but that mass is constant. But see how it, as the probability goes down, it gets squished out to be much wider. And so this is kind of my mental model then now of what's going on with the probability, the probability flow, is that as that area, the point between those two lines, as it becomes less and less probable, then the points have to move apart to preserve constant area under the curve. So anyhow, I don't know if that's helpful to others. And then the last one was, I think, I didn't see her here today. I think it was Vita, was it? Asked the question when we had that discussion about, does a contour line, is it the same as the mean of the SDE trajectories from that point? And so to answer that question, I just coded that up. And basically we go through and run a bunch of points, 1,000 points here. So we're starting with variance, a mean of 10, variance of 0.001. So point density up at 10. I'm running the SDE, so that's using a diffusion with the variance preserving parameters. And I'm generating the contours from that. So that's using, I can't compute the CDF directly, but what I can do is I can sort the samples and just pick the nth line in that sorted list. So I do that and I plot that guy. And then I also plot, where's the other part we plotted? C line is the contours in the SDE, which we know matches the flow. We already demonstrated that it matches the flow. And then we're taking the mean of the stochastic trajectories from that point and plotting the two of those, and they do in fact follow this similar trajectory. So again, not proof, but I suspect that the answer to the question is yes. The flow, probability flow, represents the mean of the trajectories. Okay, end of notebook. That's it. We made it. Sully's amazed because that might be the first time I've finished in time.
So I just have about 15 questions. Just hold on here a second.
Okay, you're gonna run me over, huh?
So if you go back to the first slide, I noticed a mistake.
Okay.
Nice job, Roger.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
that was impressive.
Yeah, it was.
And it's such a cool concept. The whole thing's cool.
Yeah, it would be interesting to start exploring. Like this is in one dimension. What could you see in 2 dimensions? Would be interesting, but I think you might get lost pretty quickly too.
Well, because then all the flow are inherently 4 dimensions, right? Because yeah.
Well, I don't think there's anything that makes a score function of requires it to be a function of 1 dimension. I think the score function can be a function.
Oh, I just mean visualizing gets really hard.
Oh yeah,
like
how to visualize, yeah.
The visuals get like doing a 1 dimension. You basically have a 3-dimensional plot in order to display the flow, and so then you'd be into 4 or 5-dimensional plots to try to.
Yeah. I mean, you could get into 2 because you could just use time, much like here I used. So here I did time in that is the 3rd dimension to plot it. So we could do something like that. We could plot a score function as a function of time between 2 dimensions. But I'm curious, like if I have if I've learned a score function for images, for even for MNIST or something like that, what does it look like? I got to assume that there's interactions between them. I got to somehow, the fact that I've got an eyeball over here is going to increase the probability I've got a black eyeball over here as well. So there's, again, between the dimensions, there's interactions. So anyhow,